I'm gonna present Gilberto Gomes. It is a great pleasure to have Gilberto Gomes here. Uh, I'll introduce him as the last time. I think Gilberto is one of the forerunners in our field in Brazil. Uh, he is he's a professor at the Northern State Rio de Janeiro University. He's also a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, so have different approaches in the field. Once someone asked me if I was the first philosopher to be really into neuroscience, I said, not at all. I mean, I was still an undergrad, and Gilberto Gomes was like answering Libet in the Journal of Consciousness Studies. I had the pleasure to have Gilberto as part of my PhD committee. It was a great debate. And so he's one of the old gangsters of our field in Brazil. So it's a pleasure to hear you. Please feel free to talk.
Thank you, Gabriel. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk to you again. I have changed a little the title of my talk and the content also from that which I presented in July. So now my title is Compatibility with Probabilistic Causation is more important than compatibility with determinism. Well, I'd like to say, first of all, that 2 days ago, two members of my family were struck with serious health problems. So I had thoughts of canceling my participation in this conference. And then I thought about it and I decided, no, I'll present my talk. I won't cancel this. Well, but according to a certain doctrine, I didn't decide anything at all because it was all decided since the Big Bang, since the beginning of the universe. It was decided that I was going to present this talk. That's a sort of a strange theory. I wouldn't even say theory. I'd rather say doctrine, isn't it? But this is, in fact, the doctrine of determinism. And compatibilism has been defined in relation to determinism. So compatibilism is defined as the theory that free will is compatible with determinism. Well, for free will, we have different definitions, okay? And we may try to find the most adequate definition to investigate its compatibility. With what? Well, we could ask if free will, adequately defined, is compatible with physicalism, for example, with causality, with neuroscience, with probabilistic causation, or with determinism. But the term compatibilism was preempted by the doctrine of determinism. So it has been established like this. When we use the word compatibilism, and this was pointed out to me forcefully by Marcelo Fishborn, precisely in a paper that he wrote, because in previous papers of mine, I had defined myself as a compatibilist. But Marcelo then came and said, no, but you're not a compatibilist because you don't support compatibility of free will with determinism. But what is determinism? No, determinism is this. We might define determinism in different ways, but no, determinant has been defined. And so what is determinism? That's the question. Determinism is not only the thesis that all events are determined by causes. No, this is too little. What is determinism? All events are completely determined, down to the smallest details, by previous events. Nothing that occurs could have occurred differently, not even in a very slightly different way. William James' definition, he said in a poetic way, the future has no ambiguous possibilities hidden in its womb. And also, any other future complement than the one fixed from eternity is impossible. Another definition by McKenna and Perebohm, determinism is just the thesis that at any time only one future is physically possible. And they cite the authors who spoke about this. Also, Nadelhofer and collaborators use this definition. Determinism is the view that every event, X, is necessitated by past events, P, together with the laws of nature, L. More formally, it has the following form: necessarily, if PL or PNL, then X. If determinism is true, then at any moment, given the past and the laws, there is one and only one possible outcome. Indeterminism is just the denial of determinism. If indeterminism is true, at any given moment, more than one outcome is possible, even if you keep the past and the laws fixed. Sometimes we have the impression that indeterminism means that nothing is determined, that there's no determination at all, that anything can happen. That's not true. Indeterminism just means that not everything is determined in a completely precise way. Not everything has a probability of one of happening. Well, then we must ask the question, should we care about determinism? Should we care about this doctrine? Is it a scientific fact? And my answer is no, because science doesn't prove in any way that all events are determined in this precise and absolute manner. Is it a necessary scientific presupposition? I also think it isn't, because we have scientific theories based on probability. So we don't need to presuppose determinism for science. Although many scientists have this conception, they, I would say this preconception, this prejudice, this metaphysical prejudice of determinism. Is it a testable scientific hypothesis? Of course not, because we cannot devise any experiment that can test everything, that can test every event in the universe to establish the probability of one for all events. So it's completely untestable. Is it a viable metaphysical assumption? I will say something about this in this talk today. Another question, does it correspond with our intuition about free decisions? And here I'll quote the talk by Marcel Bras, saying that no one choosing pizza instead of pasta considers that this choice was already determined billions of years ago. So it's not something that goes, that is in accord with our usual everyday intuition. Well, should we care about physicalism? I think so. My answer to this would be yes, because if we admit, even if we just suppose as a hypothesis that the mental is the result of the action of our brain, this has a lot of consequences that are important. So I think we should care about this. Should we care about neuroscience in relation to free will? I would also say yes, of course. And Jennifer Chandler, for example, in her talk in the July conference, she told us about changes in what a person freely chooses caused by deep brain stimulation. So neuroscience has a lot to do. Now, this is just an example. We could cite many others. It has a lot to do, of course, with free will. Should we care about causality? Yes, because it's important to know that it's important at least to question whether we can explain, whether we can provide causes, causal explanations for choices that can be defined as free according to a definition of free will. Of course, I won't have time here to go into all the questions related to this field. For example, the definition, what is the adequate definition of free will? We could have many talks just about this problem. Should we care about causality then? Of course, yes. Should we care about probabilistic causality? I think so, because that's especially in biological and human sciences, social sciences, and psychological sciences, probabilistic explanations are very adequate, seem to be very important in different areas. Now let's consider this quotation by Hume. "'Tis the constant conjunction of objects along with the determination of the mind which constitutes a physical necessity. And the removal of these is the same thing with chance, as objects must either be conjoined or not, and as the mind must either be determined or not to pass from one object to another, it is impossible to admit of any medium betwixt chance and absolute necessity." Well, is it really so? We could argue that objects or events may be more or less frequently conjoined, giving rise to probabilistic causal determination. So we can also admit degrees of chance. And I will remember here Peter's concept of criterial causation, which admits random determination provided certain criteria are met. So as I understood it, this may be seen as a degree of randomness. And the classical quotation from Werner Heisenberg, quantum theory actually forces us to formulate these laws precisely as statistical laws or probabilistic laws, and to depart radically from determinism. McKenna and Peribom define indeterminism as the claim that at some time, more than one future is physically possible. Now, determinism versus natural causality. From the talk of Nitamar Oliveira, also in the conference in July, we get this definition of determinism. All events are determined by natural laws or by some form of conditioning, such as psychological, sociological, or cultural conditioning. I'd be very happy if determinism could be defined this way. And there will be much less problem, and it would be much more interesting. And the question of its compatibility with free will would be much more pertinent. But this is too soft. This is not as strict, as as hard as the definition that is traditionally accepted of determinism, which is the one that I have mentioned before. So we come to a certain kind of question that is very frequently, very frequent nowadays. We frequently meet this kind of question. Did you decide freely, or did your brain decide deterministically before you? So we find this sort of question in many authors that comment the Libet experiments, for example, or other Libet-style experiments. We find it, for example, in Gazzaniga. Did you decide who is in charge? Is it you or is it your brain? As if me and my brain were different things. So this is in fact a dualist language used by monist authors. And I will make reference here to a very interesting paper by Mudrik and Yuri Maus about this problem of these authors that have a physicalist position, but in spite of this use language, use ways of speaking that use dualistic concepts. The title of their paper is Closet Dualism, as if these authors were in the closet with regarding their dualist position. I don't think that's very adequate to speak of a closet dualist, because they are not essentially dualists, these authors. I think they are physicalists, but the problem is that they let themselves use concepts that come from dualist thought, from a dualist form of thinking. So when you say, do you decide, or your brain, did your brain decide before you did? This is dualism. This is, the you here refers to something that is not in your brain. So there is, I say, a spurious association of monism or physicalism or natural causation of mental events with determinism. And this is a big problem, because anyone who is inclined to adopt physicalism or to adopt a natural explanation of mental events may think that he must accept determinism, that determinism is somehow bound with a scientific conception of the mind. Well, I will argue that determinism, if it's true, I will argue that if determinism is true, there is no way of distinguishing a true belief from an illusory one. No way to distinguish knowledge from illusion. This is an argument, this is a claim that, of course, is controversial. And I'll speak a little bit here about opposite conceptions about this. But this argument that determinism is self-defeating, I used it in my talk in July. And after that, I did a little research about this, and I found that it has a long history, in fact, this kind of argument. It starts in reality in antiquity with Epicurus, who said that the man who says that all things come to pass by necessity cannot criticize one who denies that all things come to pass by necessity, for he admits that this too happens of necessity. Now I'm going to present you some arguments involving Patricia Churchland and Popper and Eccles. She wrote a paper in 1981 criticizing the book by Popper and Eccles that is called The Self and Its Brain. Of course, I would prefer to speak of the brain and itself, but I'm not defending the dualist position of Popper and Eccles. But let's see the relation between this criticism of their dualism with the idea that this would in some way imply an adoption of determinism. Patricia Churchland writes, in the familiar vein, it is argued that determinism, so she uses the concept of determinism, is incompatible with free will, since physicalism implies determinism. Then physicalism is false. But does physicalism imply determinism? Or can we say that physicalism only implies natural causation, but that this causation may be probabilistic causation and not determinism. Well, Churchland argues that Haeckel's argument that determinism is self-refuting is a non sequitur. If determinism is correct, then it does not in the least follow that we do not reason. On the contrary, what follows is that our reasoning and our reasoned behavior is causally produced. And now I ask, causally produced or deterministically produced? I think that if determinism is correct, what follows is that our thinking is deterministically produced. But if deterministically produced, our reasoning would be strictly determined by previous causes. It would not be primarily guided by an assessment of reasons. It would be just determined by previous events. If among its causes there are good reasons, this will be by sheer luck. And if we think we can discern the good reasons from the bad ones, what is happening in reality is that our thought is merely following a path that was determined since the beginning of the universe. Patricia continues, so far from denying that humans are purposeful and reasonable, determinism is the thesis that there is a causal network which produces such behavior. A causal network or a determinist network. Determinism not only assumes that there is a causal network, it assumes that this causal network is deterministic. She continues, nor of course is the determinist limited to Skinnerian behaviorism in his conception of the appropriate causal theory. He may, for example, be a cognitivist. But in a deterministic world, however, cognitivism is no better and no worse than behaviorism. They are both just predetermined events that occur in philosophers or psychologists' minds. The anti-determinist proves nothing if he merely appropriates to his side the notion of acting for a reason by insisting that it means contra-causally produced. But they need not insist on this. They can only insist that it's not deterministically produced. Why contra-causally? There may be causes for our reasons, for our thinking, but these need not be deterministic causes. She continues, he needs to show that acting for a reason is uncaused behavior if his anti-deterministic conviction is so strong that he relates acting for a reason to contra-causally produced. And we see again that determinism is mistakenly identified with causality. Causality need not be deterministic. Now, Popper says, if our opinions are the result of something other than, if our opinions are the result of something other then I think there's one word missing here. The free judgment of reason, or the weighing of reasons, of the pros and cons, then our opinions are not worth taking seriously. Thus, an argument that leads to the conclusion that our opinions are not arrived at in this way defeats itself. Churchland answers, determinism does not deny that our opinions are sometimes the result of weighing of reasons. On the contrary, it is a theory concerning how we are going to explain the phenomenon we call the weighing of reasons. Whether the weighing of reasons is or is not an interplay of free, uncaused, again, events in the mind is what the debate about free will and determinism is all about. And I comment that it's clear that Churchland is identifying free with uncaused, but we can admit that free thinking is probabilistically caused and not deterministic. Continuing, reasoned behavior may be explained by something other than the activity of a free will, for example, by something physical, though the explanation may be much more intricate and complicated than anything we now envisage. But free will itself may be something physical with an intricate explanation. This author, Nestor, wrote a paper in 1986 called How the Self-Defeating Argument Against Determinism Defeats Itself. It's an intricate argument, of course, but in a nutshell, we can say that what he argues in this paper is that since this acronym is for determinism is self-defeating argument, the argument that determinism is self-defeating. Since this maintains that determinism defeats any argument, it also defeats itself. So he thinks that this argument is not valid because it also defeats itself. My opinion about this is that Disda is defeated by determinism as any other belief. It is not defeated by itself. Suppose determinism is true and Disda is false, but John believes it to be true. Belief in Disda is also defeated in this case. Therefore, it is determinism that defeats Disda as any other belief, not Disda itself or the conjunction of Disda with determinism. Locke in 2018 wrote a book called Free Will and Epistemology, and he also supports the argument that the belief in determinism is self-defeating. I believe that this argument has the form of a reductio ad absurdum. We assume that determinism is true first, and we derive some consequence of this assumption. Then we see that these consequences undermine any reason we may have for accepting any belief, in fact, not only this belief, but any belief, including the truth of determinism. Of course, it is controversial whether these consequences really follow from determinism. There are all authors who adhere to determinism, and they devise all sorts of argument to counter this argument that determinism is self-defeating. Well, another point that I find important to emphasize here is that I argue against determinism from a point of view usually associated with arguments for determinism, because this point of view involves two claims. The first one is monism, concerning the mind-brain relation, or physicalism. And the second is the claim that every event has a cause, which may be a single event or a set of events. But what I argue is that this cause is not necessarily a sufficient cause. So determinism requires that all causes are sufficient causes, and also that at least in certain versions of it, also are necessary causes. In other words, I will assume the possibility of probabilistic causation. Well, I think that's what I had to say. And I don't know if I was very short in my presentation. What time did we start? At 4:30? No, so I was, in fact, I was too long. But I would like very much to hear your questions and your comments about what I said. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks. Questions? Peter has one naturally. There's some intermatch between your beliefs.
I don't have questions. I think it's correct what you're saying. But I do want to point out that determinism gives rise to certain puzzles that indeterminism does not face. For example, if the universe is truly ontologically—
Please, could you speak a little louder, please?
If reality is ontologically deterministic and not epistemologically, but truly ontologically indeterministic, I think it's a puzzle why there is a now and why we are in this now versus a different now, and why the now proceeds as it does. Whereas for indeterminism, the existence of a now falls out very naturally from the collapse of possibilities into the realized possibility. So determinism faces certain strange problems that indeterminism, I think, doesn't face. I don't think these are necessarily fatal. A determinist might come up with solutions to the problem of the now or the direction of time, like they do with thermodynamics. But I think it's an unexplored problem in physics and in the philosophy of physics, why there is a now. And it's a bigger problem for determinism than it is for indeterminism. So I'll just raise that as an issue. It's not a question.
Hi, thanks for the talk. It's really interesting issues, but I'm wondering if you can just say a little bit more about what the implications are, you think, for free will of probabilistic causation.
Yes. Well, this subject is too vast, of course, and I wouldn't have time today to talk about other aspects of the problem. Of course, probabilistic causation is not sufficient to explain free will. It does not in itself explain free will. It's not enough to say that free will is has to do with choices that are probabilistic determined. No, that's not enough. But the point is the question of whether free will is compatible with some sort of causality. So I think that we should grant that free will is incompatible with determinism. That's a controversial point, of course. There are all authors that are compatibilists that maintain that free will is compatible with determinism. Other authors are emphatic in their defense there of incompatibilism. I'm not here arguing for a compatibilist position, given this traditional definition of compatibilism, which has to do with compatibility with determinism, defined in this strict way. What I say is that this is not important. It doesn't matter if free will is compatible with determinism or not, so long as we do not adopt determinism. And I say that we are not obliged to adopt determinism. Even if we accept physicalism, even if we adopt a causal explanation, and if we are for a natural explanation of mental events, including choices, including free will. So, but of course, I'm just proposing that free will is compatible with probabilistic causation, but that is not enough to explain free will. I think that we would have to go into the definition of free will. What I have some ideas about this also, but they were not the subject of this talk today.
Thanks. No, I got it.
Yeah, I see the question in a quite different way, because I think there are rules of physics, but there's like I think in terms of nested hierarchies. So I think biology is a very special subset of physics, and psychology is a subset of biology. But I don't know if you by any sort of radically naturalist view of emergence or something like that, like nested hierarchies, at least as a heuristic to explain why you have properties they apply to systems and not to isolated parts. I mean, if you have any like thoughts on that, if you kind of agree with this view, if you disagree with this view. I mean, if I turn on a Bunsen burner in this seat, you're not reacting in any sense, but even bacteria will react. So it seems that we have different levels of freedom in nature, and being alive makes a difference. And this is not a vitalist. There's nothing no magic here. Nothing mystically driven. It's just that homeostasis and some natural processes makes a difference. Do you have any ideas or comments on that view?
Well, I tend to think that scientific theories are partial. They have as objects a part of reality. They don't explain everything. I'm not at all inclined to believe in a theory of everything, as it's now in fashion in certain circles to think or to propose or to aspire, because nobody has come close of anything like this. But I don't believe that we'll ever have a theory of everything. And I don't believe that all scientific explanations that are probabilistic will or must be derived or derivable from a more fundamental deterministic explanation. So even in physics, we have different situations. Popper, for example, has an interesting paper in which he compares clouds and clocks. Clocks are very deterministic systems, and clouds are very random and so on. And so he makes the point that our scientific conceptions were very influenced by the success of Newtonian mechanics. And Newtonian mechanics is about systems that are very predictable, like the movement of the planets and the stars and the tides also, and the movement of the bullets, ballistic, and so on. Well, but if other things were in question, this kind of theory would not be adequate. So we have scientific theories that are very different, that invoke probabilistic explanations. For example, genetics. When you say that a couple that has a child and the man has a genotype for example, a blood group A, B, and the mother is AO, then you can say what are the probabilities of the blood groups in their offspring. So also evolution theory is a theory based on the selection of randomly appearing variation. So even in physics, we have, of course, quantum explanations, quantum mechanics that involves probabilistic explanations also. So I don't think we have any reason to privilege deterministic explanations or to believe that there will ever be a theory of everything. Right. I'm not sure if this answers your question.
As you said, science is partial. Your answer is also partial, but we talk later. because Marcelo is waiting. So a big round of applause for Gilberto Gomes.